Hey everyone, you're watching VGO 40 and this is VGO Girl, and today we are taking a look at City of Sigh in Overlord mode. Now they actually changed the name to Castle of Sighs, but it's the same dungeon. And just for a quick overview, if you want to watch the first 13 seconds and know the mechanics really well for this dungeon, then it's pretty much the same thing. We found that the last boss does enrage earlier than probably he should, and I'm hoping that they will modify that to allow some more time, because even with really good DPS, we still had the boss enraging. But other than that, most of the mechanics are the same, but we're going to go ahead and go through each boss's fight so that you are aware of what the mechanics are and give some tips along the way. Okay, let's go ahead and start off with the first boss. Now for this boss, again, just like normal, you're going to see a few mechanics. DPS mostly stays off to the side, and the tank has a triangle-like AoE that they have to dodge. DPS, just move out of it if you see it. Then there's another mechanic where the boss does like an AoE sort of thing where you have to move back, but you have to be careful not to move back too far. Here you can see it. Just kind of go between the red circle and the yellow one. Obviously don't go into the red circle on the very outer edge, because that will damage you and you'll die back there. So let's not go into that. And the only other really big mechanic here, I mean, there's some sheer damage. The only other really big mechanic here is the whirlpools. Now I'm going to go ahead and fast forward to them. Okay, so at this point you'll see that there's a bunch of whirlpools that appear on the ground, and you can see them there. And above there's a casting bar, and when that casting bar gets to halfway, you need to stand in the whirlpool, and then when he does his knockback, you are immune to it. Otherwise, again, he'll try and knock you back into that red. Now, I remember seeing in adventure mode that this had some sort of message about standing in the puddle halfway through. I did not see that in this particular one, so just keep an eye out for that. Something else I noticed when I was watching over this again is that the DPS sometimes get red circles around them, and it seems like they just kind of stay there. Just move out of the red circles, DPS, if you happen to get those on you. Now I'm going to fast forward through most of this. Again, it's the same mechanics repeated. The next part, I just want to point out one more time that here we get these whirlpools again, and you can see the casting bar under the boss's name, and again halfway through you kind of go and stand in that whirlpool, and then you're immune when he does his knockback. Okay, I'm just going to let the rest of this play out in the background quickly so that you can, in case you see anything different. Most of it is the same, and just go ahead and finish up that first boss, and then we will move on to boss number 2. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through, I think, most of this. There's nothing really noteworthy. We did pull the mobs on the sides. I think that probably for this section you might just need to pull the mobs on one side versus both, but you just want to pretty much clear everything up to the second boss. Okay, here we are at boss number 2. And this one is not a single mob. I'm sure you're familiar with it from Adventure. There's you have to cover the two corners, the left and the right, and the center. When the mobs come out, somebody has to hit them. So you want to spread out. It's less important, I think, as a tank to really have aggro of everything. They don't seem to hit too hard, but it's really just a matter of you don't want them to get to the back without having hit them first. So I think it's if 4 mobs get to the back, it could be 5, then you lose this particular boss fight. So just make sure that everything is aggroed and it doesn't get to the back. And that's kind of the most, basic of this fight. Just kind of go through it and kill everything. There's going to be tons of mobs. Now, once it hits a certain point, there will be on the stairs on the left and the right, I'm not sure how well you can see them, but on the stairs and the sides, there'll be 2 bosses that spawn, or mobs that spawn. And when those two mobs spawn, they will put shields on anything that's left out. So generally, I think the DPS go for the mobs on the sides and kill them as quickly as you can. Now, as a tank, because I have a pull mechanic, I usually go for the boss that spawns in the center so I can keep pulling him back while the DPS is doing their thing. But DPS, we do have to be careful because there are things that spawn on the sides during that phase as well. Okay, here's that Guard of Sigh message. This is the big guy in the middle here. Now, at this point, usually the DPS is hitting the two bosses or mobs on the side. So I usually just go for the center here. And then if you can see, I move back and just pull the boss back to me. And as soon as my pulls refresh, I pull the boss back to me again. Now, the most important part of this, I think, at least for Dragon Riders, and if anybody else has a confusion sort of spell, you want to make sure that you don't use your dragon on here. Now, the flying dragon is fine, but the shorter dragon is not. And the reason is I've noticed, at least on adventure mode, when you do the dragon and the confusion, what happens is it resets the health of these really large mobs, so you have to then start all over to DPS them. Okay, so the first time through this, there's just one of those large mobs, and the second time through, there's three. So you really need to make sure to use your knockbacks, your pushbacks, your pulls, gathering the mobs, anything you could do to keep pushing those large mobs away. Once you kill those three, it's an easy finish for the rest of the fight. Now here again, I can use my flying dragon, no problem. It doesn't have any problems with these. But the smaller dragon, where it's standing on the ground, the confusion causes the health to reset. Now, I'm hoping they'll fix that again. But if they don't, I'm not going to try to use it just in case. Okay, up until this point, we really didn't have any problems with the bosses. We did just fine. But the third boss, like I mentioned before, does enrage faster, it seems, than the other ones. Okay, now clear all the mobs up to the second boss. Make sure to focus on the brown wolves first, as they are the healers. And go ahead and just clear everything up through to the last guy. Okay, the last boss has some AoEs that he does that are like brown AoEs on the ground. Just avoid them. I'm not going to go through too much of that part of the fight because I think that everybody knows how to avoid circles and AoE damage. The thing about here is kind of positioning. Try not to stack on top of each other. It's really important to spread out a little bit for this boss. Now, there's one mechanic that is really important that I do need to go over. Okay, the mechanic on this boss is if you have something that says water over your head, you need to go to the people who say fire over their head first, and then you can go over to the wood people. Now, in this case, the person with fire over their head went over the wood first, and so the fire people could not put out the fire, so we died. However, after that point, the trees will appear and you want to hide behind the trees. So this was not a great example, but it shows what not to do, because here we had two people die because the fire was not put out. Okay, just keep avoiding those brown sections on the ground where the boss is doing AoE, and go ahead and we're going to move on to the next instance of that mechanic. Now here you'll see that I get a water above my head. The first thing I did was run over to somebody with fire above their head, and once I made sure that there was no more people with fire, I went over to the people with wood. And it's really random as to who gets it, but it's important to make sure that the water goes to the fire first and then to the wood. If the fire goes next to the wood, you'll burn the wood and the wood will be gone, and then this tree won't appear, and when the boss does his AoE, you won't have anything to hide behind and you'll all die. So I think we should have been able to clear this with no problem with the first group that we had, but we did replace one of our DPS, and get a higher DPS, and we still had this boss in rage at a pretty decent percentage. At first it was like 25%, and I think it's just because all the mechanics that you're doing, you're really having to watch the mechanics more than your DPS. So again, here is another example. I have wood. I just made sure that the fire was put out before I went anywhere near the water people. So that's it. You know, just finish off the fight if you can, and you know, hopefully you can get past this. Hopefully they'll adjust the boss a little bit so it makes it a little bit more realistic compared to some of the other Overlord dungeons. Hopefully you found this helpful. You're watching VGO 40 and this is VGO Girl, and we will see you next time in World of Kings.